All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lee-Sean Huang, and this is Design Future Live. If this is your first time joining us, Design Future Live is a show where I have conversations with designers, other creative professionals on how they've designed their careers and their lives and how they're creating the future. This started out almost 2 years ago now as a podcast called Design Future Now. It's pivoted once into a Instagram live show on AIGA Design, where we were doing when in-person things shut down, and now we've switched to new channels, and now we're live streaming on AIGA's Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So thanks so much for joining us if you're watching this live or if you're watching the recording. So without further ado, I'll introduce our guest for today. Esther Mun is a graduate of the School of Visual Arts, SVA in New York, where she earned a degree in graphic design. She's also worked at Pentagram and then at Duffy & Partners before co-founding Little Fury Design in 2006 with her partner, Tina Godin. So Esther, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Of course, it's an honor to be here.
So I started to introduce you and your background, but love to hear from your own words a little bit more about Little Fury, and then we can dive deep into your personal story as well.
Yeah, Tina and I met 15 years ago, more than 15 years ago. And she was actually introducing me to a job opportunity at Martha Stewart magazine when I was at Duffy. And I asked her a question: what is it that you really want to do? And we found this common passion about tangible products. So she came over that night to my apartment and we just discussed on what is the thing that we want to make. And this linkable notebook idea is what actually made us quit our full-time jobs to launch this product line. But then that kind of led to, let's design together and make money together. And that's how Little Fury Design was birthed.
So Little Fury Design is both a design studio where you work with clients and do that sort of work, as well as you have these different projects where you launch products like the Linkable notebooks. You also have this side project we were just talking about in the green room for little cake toppers. But how do you think about that? How do you juggle these two sides of what you do in terms of the client work and then these projects that are essentially entrepreneurial ventures that spin off of that?
Yeah, we do enjoy branding and packaging as clients, but I think our passion's always been collaborating with different types of artists, whether they're architects or construction or operations or dancers. So we always kind of keep that in mind to get our juices going, in a sense, that creative inspiration going, so that we're not always tethered to design clients, but also producing and making tangible things.
Got it. And I feel like we're kind of in this age of digital now. And how have you been thinking about that, or kind of resisting the moving to digital, especially now, just this last year and what's going on? Like, how do you stay grounded in that focus and your passion in the physical?
We've been running Little Fury Design for 15 years, and there was a period where should we grow our studio with a digital arm? Because that's where all the studios are moving into, and should we grow the business with more designers and make it more robust? And we really thought about it, and we were like, you know what? I don't think that's our strength, and that is not our interest, so let's not force it. So we've been pretty good about sticking to what we are better at and the area that we actually enjoy the most. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's very telling that we stuck with branding and packaging, tangible packaging, because we both love tangible products.
So your name is Little Fury. Is
Yeah.
it because you've chosen to stay a small team, or what's the story behind that name?
That was actually Tina's freelance name, Little Fury. And when we joined together, we kind of looked at each other and we're just like, hey, you're little and we're both Fury. So we could be furious. So let's just keep it Little Fury. We thought it was very keeping to who we were.
I love that name story and how her name was able to include you in this way and be a part of your collective identity. How do you differentiate yourselves? Like, how do you stand out in terms of your point of view from other studios that are working in this branding and packaging space?
Um, that's an interesting question because there are so many studios out there, and we actually did go through this identity crisis where like, how are we different and how do we set ourselves, apart? And I think it was one of those years where we really needed to define and identify who we are as a design studio. We actually hired a strategist and the strategy people that we, share space with. And they actually kind of helped us define who we are. And so our tagline is every big idea needs a little fury. And we actually kind of really gain our strength in the fact that we're both creative directors, but we're in the nitty gritty of all design projects, from sketches all the way to production files. So because we're nimble and we have so much experience together, we tend to work very fast and yeah, we just get a lot of things done and lift a lot of weight. And I think the strength and the golden nugget with working with Little Fear is that you get to work directly with us. So we're very strict about taking maybe maximum 3 clients. So we have full attention and give 110% to each client that we have.
That's wonderful. I wanted to direct our viewers, our listeners, to the Little Fury website because they have this amazing like infographic flowchart kind of thing about both Esther and her partner Tina's career and story and how they've come together. And it's super cute, but also it's like a great way of reimagining like a resume instead of like bullet points and things like that. What was the idea behind that? How did you decide like, oh, let's do an infographic to tell our story?
We actually never had or made a formal resume in our life. So I think when we first decided to conjoin our portfolio pieces to launch Little Fury, Tina and I looked at each other and we were just like, I don't want to do another like resume. That's just like, telling a story of where we went and where we worked. And yes, those things are important, but let's do it in a visually interesting way. And the first resume chart that you're seeing, or not right now, but like the first one was a lot shorter. So we decided to just grow the chart. And we've gotten a lot of feedback how that's like, a lot of people's favorite part about the whole website. Yeah.
That's wonderful. So let's dive into your past and a little bit more of these key points in your careers. You've talked about how you met with Tina. Could you give a piece of advice to your younger self, and then we'll dive into a little bit more of your experiences and stories from there?
Advice that I would give my younger self would be more curious. And I think that curiosity grows open-mindedness. I think ever since I was young, I was very like task-oriented, goal-oriented. So I was very focused on like, what is my next goal? What is like the next firm that I want to be part of? What is the next project that I want to work on? So it was very task-oriented. And I think that has shut down a lot of maybe opportunities or people that I could have been engaged with or opportunities that I could have walked through. Yeah, so be more curious is like the first thing that came to mind.
Be more curious. That's great. What are some of the things that you're curious about now that are maybe outside of your day-to-day work as a designer?
I think I've been always curious to what brings people joy. So whenever I get to know people, I love asking that. Like, what brings you joy? Instead of like, oh, what do you do? Or, what you do, does that bring you joy? Because I think that kind of tells you like a real part of who they are in a sense, rather than like, oh, what do you do? Where do you went? Like instead of running through a resume in a sense, just who they are as people.
Yeah, I'm so annoyed by that "what do you do" question in like these casual social networking kind of environments. And it's one of the things that I don't look forward to with things like reopening. It's like let's reopen, but ask like better questions like what are you curious about or what brings you joy?
Yeah.
For sure. So going back to your journey, your career journey, you've been an entrepreneur for a while now with Little Fury, but prior to that, you were working in like larger studios, larger agencies like Pentagram, and then at Duffy. Was there a point where you just decided like you wanted to focus on the Little Fury, the kind of small team, versus maybe some of these larger studios and agencies in terms of how they work?
I've never actually imagined or wanted to start my own design studio. So what the catalyst was producing our own product line. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of led to, hey, we should make money together. That's how Little Fury came about. But Tina and I, we never really had like, one day we want to have our own design studio. One day I would love to, I dream about having my own design studio. That was never really in the picture. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the design studio, it sounds like it was something to just support your collaboration and allow you to put these products in the world. Was that kind of how it happened?
Yeah.
So let's talk about your first product. It's called Start Here, Linkable Notebooks. Could you tell us more about that and how that came about?
Yeah, so Tina and I, we got together and she had this passion for like a book of maps where you would jot down where you've been and like write down, these are my favorite restaurants. And it was all like physical notebooks. And I was obsessed with planners and I still write my schedules. I never use Google Calendar. I write all schedules in my planner, like actually the Start Here planner that I rewrite with numbers. And every time I would do a project, I sketch a lot. So I started stitching the really thin Muji notebooks because I wanted to refer back to the sketches that I've done before because Muji notebooks are really thin. So I would literally stitch the binding. And so it became this like stitched notebooks, like series of 3-4 notebooks. And so we were like, oh, I wonder if we could like link this together or connect this together. And so we went through many iterations of like complicated mock-ups. And then we came up with the idea where we have this front pocket where the last pocket, back pocket of the notebook slides into the front pocket. And it's very seamless. It just slides in and out. And it looks very simple. So we were like, this is it. So after we, finished with hand mocking stuff, we actually sent the file out for like a professional mock-up and we produced 20,000 notebooks 15 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
So first of all, the design, it sounds like it's like the marsupial of notebooks with these pockets going into things, or like the Voltron of notebooks that you can combine together.
Yes.
And so you produced 20,000 of these. Like, was this something that you like did a Kickstarter for or pre-sale, or was it just like, this is interesting, we think this is interesting to sell, and like, let's just make some and see what happens? Like, how did you get to that 20,000 number and just decide to put that into production?
Our first round was with Yupo paper, which was really expensive. We actually discovered that material by working on Rembrandt toothpaste. And to be honest, I think we were young and naive. We were just like in love with this genius idea. So we put in so much of our money that we made with our first project. And 10,000 was a mark where we started hitting a lower cost per book. We didn't do any Kickstarter. We didn't promote on any level. We were featured in a lot of magazines. We had a few stores, approaching us and we sold at their stores. But looking back, I don't think we did our part in terms of really pushing for sale. I think we were just such makers that we knew how to make, but we did not know how to sell.
Yeah, I really appreciate your honesty about the origin story. I feel like with a lot of entrepreneurs, there's this kind of myth making about, oh, it started in a garage or all of these things. But then there's also this like selection bias or survivorship bias of like, oh, well, because you made it or because you're successful, you can tell that story now. So I appreciate the real talk about like, yeah, we didn't know. So we just invested our own money into it and put it out there.
Yep.
And so are these still available, or was it just kind of a limited run for yourself and for whoever wanted to buy them?
We have about 2,000 notebooks left, and I'm still trying to sell them. Yeah.
Can you tell people where they can get them if they want them?
Email me directly, Esther at Little Fury. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you also have another different side project that you've been working on called Little Cake Toppers,
Yeah.
custom wooden wedding cake toppers. Can you tell us the story behind that?
Um, it was about 8, 9 years ago. We were at a flea market, Brooklyn flea market, trying to sell our notebooks. And it was rainy day, so nobody was coming to the flea market buying stuff, but there was another vendor selling those wooden toppers. And so I was so bored. So I bought a set and I started painting a wedding cake topper for a friend. And then I got an idea of, and I started posting it on Instagram. And I did another set for like a Korean wedding dress or Chinese wedding dress, like a cultural wedding dresses, which is really
Yeah.
intricate and beautiful. So I started having so much fun customizing them. And then I started getting inquiries from strangers. So that was like the idea where like, oh, I should turn this into a business.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's how it started.
It's interesting to kind of compare and contrast the notebook business where you kind of went in on a passion and put in the order for thousands, tens of thousands of units. And then this one is like, okay, this is just something you were interested in. You shared it on Instagram. I guess Instagram exists now, unlike when you first launched your notebooks. And then it kind of built organically that you were able to determine demand because people were reaching out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I personally can't stand like registry wedding gifts,
Mhm.
very impersonal. It's either that or you give them cash. So
Yeah.
wedding cake toppers or the topper set actually became a really great gift. And that's how I actually started. And then when I started getting, inquiries from strangers, that's when I decided to charge it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a great point. I'm Taiwanese, so I'm like, yeah, just give cash, for the wedding. But
No,
it is like, it's so interesting the history of like these wedding registries, even though today, like most couples are already living together before they get married. So like,
yeah,
do they really need a new toaster? They've probably had a toaster for a while now, so it's like, there's still these like old fashioned customs. It's like, is it really fitting today's purposes?
yeah.
So speaking of fitting today's purposes, well, first I just wanted to pause and do a reset. If anybody is joining the stream more recently, I'm here with Esther Mun from Little Fury Design. I'm Lee-Sean Huang from AIGA, and this is Design Future Live, where I talk with designers and creative professionals about how they've designed their careers, their lives, and how they're creating the future. So speaking of like this kind of break with the past or break with some of these like myths, what is a myth or misconception about your craft, your industry that you'd like to dispel for our audience today?
Hmm. My brain went to so many directions with that question. But I think the thing that stood out the most was, I think because we're in an industry where we are using machines,
Mhm.
that the thing that I want to dispel is that that does not equal like faster producing time, in a sense where there's a human behind these machines. So we need time and space to explore and really research and take our time to produce something that is thoughtful. Um, yeah, I've been thinking about how like, oh, I wonder why even till now, and so many designers, like their number one complaint is like everything was due yesterday. And it's like, is it because we're on the machines that people think like we could just produce, you know? And there's like
Right.
even like a running joke between Tina and I going like, dude, we're not Kinkos, you know? So yeah, I think that's something that came to my mind as like a number one thing.
Yeah. I like this idea of like, we're not Kinkos. And I think more and more as technology permeates our lives, we start using the terms that we use for technology for ourselves, right? When people say like, oh, I don't have bandwidth for that right now, or like, my memory is full. It's like, are you like, you're not a computer, right? You can't do like a RAM update on your brain. But
Yeah.
it's interesting how these technological metaphors kind of change the way we think about ourselves as humans and as professionals.
Yes.
And so, what are you reading right now, like watching or listening to right now that you want to recommend to our audience?
I am currently reading this book called Art and Faith by Mako Fujimura. Um, I would say I'm like 1/3 in it. And then I just started another book called Art of Gathering.
Oh, I love that book.
Okay. Yeah, I just started.
That's great. You know, Priya Parker, who's the author of The Art of Gathering, she did like a limited series podcast, I think with the New York Times during the pandemic, kind of updating it, right? Because it's about gathering. She's a professional facilitator and conflict mediator, and like talking about all sorts of issues of like, oh, how do you gather during like social distancing? Or she just did an interview on Brene Brown's podcast where she talks about like coming back from COVID. You know, for the folks tuning in on the live, Esther and I were just talking in the green room about meeting friends who you haven't seen in like over a year, and like what are these protocols around, like, do you hug, do you handshake, like how do we negotiate all of this social awkwardness again, or like get back comfortable with these things.
Yeah.
So I totally I just wanted to second that recommendation wholeheartedly myself.
Awesome.
So I also wanted to take some audience questions. I see people posting in the chat here in LinkedIn and some of our other channels. Lindsay wanted to know, is there a place where she can see pictures of the notebooks online?
Probably Little Fury Design Instagram account. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a lot of examples of co-branded ones too.
Great. Oh, I see Babita has posted links to that on Instagram. So check that out down there. So do you have any plans for what's next in terms of launching new products or ventures or anything like that?
You know, during COVID, I've been incubating like 2 projects, even though it was really hard time to motivate myself to do anything. So there's one idea that I'm working on with all kinds of artists where they are actually hosting their own version of workshops, whether you're a chef or a musical artist or tap dancer or calligrapher, that they're going to be hosting their own workshops, and it's going to be called Gather. That I'm looking to launch in the summer, July, and I'm hoping that we could start meeting in person for that. And then the other one is I'm actually working on illustrating a children's book.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you can share about that, or is it still under wraps?
No, it's about the whole story is about growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So when you look at something, you either have a mindset of like, oh, I don't know that, so I'm not gonna go near it, versus, oh, I don't know it, so I want to learn it. So it's about Johnny Mac and Cheese, a little elbow macaroni, who was really good at ping pong, but he's learning his lesson to stretch his mind as, from fixed mindset to growth mindset through playing with different snacks.
I love that.
Yeah.
Like, how did you get the idea for that? Like, are there kids in your life that this is sort of a message to?
No, so I have a writer friend, Tim Cox. So we were just catching up about the things that he's been working in Japan. And then we were just, catching up like a normal conversation during COVID, because we actually met in person in the fall. And I just said like, I've always wanted to illustrate children's books. And he's like, oh, I already have an idea that I got after my counseling session. And the counselor told him to read this book called Mindset. And so he was inspired from that book and wrote this short story on Johnny Mac and Cheese. And so we sat down and I was like, I think there's something here that we could actually elaborate it and make it into a story. So that's what we've been working on with an editor, and I started to illustrate, and it just became like a lot more of a tangible and like a great storyline.
Love that idea. And it's amazing how these collaborations just turn into like actual physical, tangible things. So what is something that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about in the time we have left?
Oh, I would say the one thing that I want to share that's been inspiring for me personally is that I remember my dreams ever since I was very young, and during COVID times that it's the dreamland has been taken into another level. And that's also been a point of inspiration for creative projects for me. So I think that's something that I wanted to share, because I think a lot of people dream and they remember their dreams, but they dismiss it. But I think there are times where you could pay attention to it and either listen to a special message from the dreams, or it could be a point of inspiration.
I love that. That's such a good reminder to just get enough sleep to dream too.
Yes, yes.
We have a couple audience questions here that are really great. I'll just batch them together. One's from Murad and the other one's from Uruj. I hope I'm getting your names correctly. So the first one from Murad is, as a graphic designer, as a designer in general, what do you think is needed for the future? And then I'll give you the second one and we can take them both. Uruj wants to know, how do you deal with creative block? So what's needed in the future and how do you deal with creative block?
What's needed is, I think, really thinking hard about what the world actually needs, if that makes sense. Because I think, in terms of products and apps, and there's so many things are out there, so many information. It's just a lot of things in different categories and areas. So I think even when you are taking or considering taking on the project or producing something or starting something, I think the good question to ask ourselves is this actually helpful for other people? Not just for myself, but for others. Is it helping other people? I think that's like a good way to gauge, is this actually needed for others? That's something that we've been asking a lot. For creative block, personally, oh my God, I love swimming. So like, that's like the one thing that obviously was taken away from COVID. But being in water, so anything near the water, like walk around the water, swimming, or taking a bath. Like, I think for me, like the creative flow is when I'm physically in motion. So when I'm walking or swimming or jogging, or I think that's when my brain kind of just chills out.
That's wonderful. I feel like sometimes we can get really stuck in, especially in a studio environment where you're just like at the desk or at the computer, and like that reminder you just gave us about like motion is so important.
Yes.
So to flip the script, I also like to ask my guests if they have any questions for me. So you can ask me anything you'd like. Esther, do you have any question?
Oh, for you?
Oh yeah. So you can ask me anything.
The audience.
Oh.
You know what? I'm gonna ask you the question that I ask anybody that I meet for the first time. What brings you joy?
What brings me joy? I think it's probably I get it a lot in the teaching part of my practice, which is like seeing people being able to unlock their own creativity, whether it's my students, but also like with other creative professionals and designers that I talk to on the show, and like seeing things in action. Like I love those like documentary shows that are all about the process of something. And when I see it in my students over the course of the semester, I think that gives me a lot of joy. That and like our dogs. Wonderful. And so before I take us out with some final announcements about upcoming shows and programs, Esther, can you just tell our audience where they can find you and Little Fury online?
Yeah, littlefurydesign.com is our website, Little Fury Design Instagram, or if you have any questions or anything that you're curious about, you could email me at esther@littlefury.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your URL and your contact details. So just to take us out, some announcements about upcoming events and live streams right here, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. So this Friday, also at 1 p.m. Eastern or 10 a.m. Pacific, I'm going to have a conversation about this book from Nike, published by Phaidon. It's called Nike Better is Temporary. And we'll have the author of the book, Sam Graw, joining us, as well as Demetria White, who is an executive at Nike, to tell us about the story of the book, but also the story of Nike. So really excited for that. And then the next episode of Design Future Live will be next week, May 26th, speaking with the author of this book, 2 beats ahead are Michael Hendricks. He's one of the authors along with Panos A. Panay. And this is a book about music and creativity, innovation, and super looking forward to that as well. So I hope you'll join us on the live streams there. And if you've watched this recording, this is also going to be published so you can watch it on demand afterwards. All right, everyone. Esther, thanks again for joining us. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.
Bye.